to this computer. All right. Hi, everyone. This is Zoph. And wait a minute, I totally screwed up. I messed up something. Okay, now everybody's where they should be. I'm Zoph, and you are watching Simply SCAdian, no title required. I am now going to hand things over to my lovely co-host, Lucas. Take it
Hi,
away.
everybody. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Simply Scadian, no title required. As always, our mission statement is to bring you from people from around the known world who are experts in their field. They have a lot to say. They have a lot of knowledge. The only thing they don't have is their peerage. And again, that's what we're looking for. We're looking to make space for those people that maybe haven't achieve that level yet. Maybe they don't want to achieve that level. Maybe they're happy where they're at. But you live in your barony, in your little corner of the world, with lots of these people. So we need to know who they are, because in order for us to keep bringing you this programming, in order for us to keep bringing you these wonderful guests with their wealth of knowledge, we need you. Okay, you have to send us who you think that we should talk to, and we are open to everybody. There, I don't know if you have been focusing on this season, but if you can go back and you can look at this season, we have talked to some people with just some of the most interesting scholarship I think we've had on the show has been this season. Just people looking into all sorts of things from the ancient world, and it has been really a joy to be on the show this season with those people. So again, it's about scholarship, it's about ANS, it's about fighting. It can be anything. We were just talking about heralding and bardic and everything before the show started. We want it all. We want you to provide it for us, but we want it all. We want to hear from those people. So hop on the Facebook page, fill out the form, and let us know who it is. And listen, clock's ticking, everybody. I gave you a challenge earlier in the year that I wanted to talk to somebody international. So let's get on that, because you're our eyes and ears. So let's get out there. But today we don't have to look across the pond. All right. We have a wonderful guest from right here in River City that we're going to introduce you today. So, yeah, I'm a musical theater guy. I'm going to make a Music Man reference. It's fine. I'd like to introduce you today to Ezra de Barcelona. All right. He's been a SCAdian and a Cleflander since 2021. With a focus on the 14th century, especially Iberia and Western Europe. His interests range from studies of religious relations and Jewish studies to economic history to performing arts, yay, and beyond. In the SCA, his work is often focused on calligraphy, performance, and heraldry, and is always focused on scholarship and the pursuit of excellence. Ezra, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Ezra, we always kick it off the same way. So we're going to ask you, how did you find the SCA?
Well, honestly, I have no idea how I actually first heard about the SCA, because the first that I can remember was when I was living with some partners in Maryland, now former partners, and I had the thought of, hey, I'm aware of this thing called the Society for Creative Anachronism. I wonder if they have a chapter around here. Um, I must have first heard about it from something in college. I must have come across like the website, or some Tumblr blog that I followed must have mentioned it or referenced it. I don't know. But I must have looked at it briefly in college and then was a college student and didn't go anywhere from there. And basically, one thing led to another, and I was back home here in Cleveland, um, and a bit down on my luck. Uh, and my birthday came around, July 21st, 21, and I was like, well, I'm down on my luck. My life is a bit in the dumps right now, but I've been looking into this SCA thing, and I know that there's a group local to me that meets half an hour away tonight. So my options are sulk in my bed all day, or I can go out to this SCA thing. And so I went out, and I went with my father dropped me off. I don't have a license, so I have to catch rides with people. But he dropped me off, and we literally had a conversation where he was like, "So, how do you want to do this? Like, you're walking into a new environment with people that you don't know, and like, we don't know how this is gonna go." And I was like, we sorted out. I was like, "All right, if you don't mind, just drive around the block for like 5 or 10 minutes, and I'll let you know if I get a bad vibe or I don't feel like I'm okay here. Then I'll text you, you can come pick me up, and all shall be well." He drops me off, and 20 minutes later, he texts me asking, "Hey, are we good? Because it's been 20 minutes." And I was like, "Oh, we are so good, man. I have felt like people." Um, and really the rest was history. I mean, I started going to meetings basically every week. I literally like moved heaven and earth to make sure that I could go to meetings. I went to my first event, I went to my second event, I went to my third event, and I got my AOA. Um, but I mean, ever since then, it's been a core part of my life and my identity. I mean, I recently made a post on my Facebook talking about how I've been technically inactive lately because I've been busy with work. My work takes me away from home quite a lot and very chaotically. And there's just stuff going on where I can't make it to meetings and I don't always make it to events. But I was like, well, even though I'm not, it's weird for me to say, oh, I guess I've been inactive because even though I haven't been going to SCA stuff, like I'm still a SCAdian. Like when I mutter to myself, like at work, I'm like, oh, that was so smart, Ezra. Like I am Ezra, like wherever I go and everywhere that I go, I'm thinking about, the pure like qualities, the oaths that I have made in the SCA. It's really an identity to me that I carry with me everywhere that I go across every aspect of my life. It really defines like how I do what I do.
So you have a blog.
Yes, I do. Itinerant-scholar.neocities.org. Itinerant Scholar is something I started up recently. Um, and I kind of have two blogs because Itinerant Scholar is kind of general scholarship that I don't lock down to SCA stuff. And then I also technically have Dove Volant, also at NeoCities, which is kind of more of my SCA specific stuff. I haven't touched Dove Volant recently very much. I really need to bring it up to speed. Um, but those are the two websites that I post to. I have a commitment to post to them once a week, basically as like a basically to tell myself I'm going to keep doing stuff. I don't care how high quality it is or how much I actually get done, but like every day I have to be doing a little something to build up to that weekly post. Um, and so itinerant scholar in particular is kind of me giving myself homework of like, here's a book that I've been reading, or here's some poetry that I like, and I'm going to like do something vaguely more scholarly than just talk about how much I like it. And that's very important for me because I attended a liberal arts university, Ohio Wesleyan, class of 2019. And I'm one of those weirdos who heard like the whole mission of the liberal arts, lifelong learning and, becoming an active, engaged citizen and all that. And I was like, yeah, yeah, I'm all about that stuff. I'm one of those weirdos who didn't just go to a liberal arts university and was like, well, I have my degree now, time to go into the workforce. I'm a believer. And so the blogs are part of that commitment of like, all right, just because I'm not a student anymore, just because I'm not in the academy, doesn't mean I'm going to let myself off the hook and let my most important organ, atrophy. So part of that is committing to, picking something to be reading, every week, a chapter out of a book, poem to be close reading. Um, One of the projects that I need to get back to, especially as we're starting to tick back into Penzic season, is a continuation of the lecture series that I did at Penzic 51, which was Be as the Bees. That was based on what I think is currently my biggest claim to fame, which is a deep dive into the economic history of beekeeping and bee products in medieval Europe and North Africa. That culminated into Be as the Bees, which was a total of 11 and a half hours of lecturing at Penzic. So it's a 5.5 roughly hour lecture that I did twice. So I broke it into three pieces, and each piece I did in 2 sessions. Um, that was very successful. I had a good turnout for a lot of those classes. As anyone who went to Penzic 51 knows, that by the time we got to about halfway through War Week, um, it had been scorching, it had been hot, it had been flooding. Everyone was exhausted. So at that point, my turnout had kind of dipped, and I didn't blame anyone because I wanted to dip. But I had a lot of great people show up with a lot of great perspectives. And one of them asked me an excellent question as I was presenting this research, which was I was talking about international trade of beeswax and honey. And there is a huge network of trade routes crossing the Mediterranean during SCA period, especially from roughly 1200 up to really 1600, up through the end of SCA period. But it's very active in the 1300s and 1400s. And I had someone ask, well, you have all these trade routes crisscrossing through the Mediterranean. What about piracy? You're literally going right by the Barbary Coast, one of the most infamous hotbeds of pirate activity. And I was like, they asked, like, what did people do to protect the goods, prepare for piracy? What impact did piracy play? And I was like, that is an amazing question. I have no freaking idea. That my research, mostly came from Dr. Alexandra Sapojnik and her research assistants, Mark Whelan and Louis Salesifava out of King's College London. Ask me how many times I recited that during Penzic 51. And their focus was on just, the production, trade, and consumption of the beeswax and the honey. And they kind of touched on a few other things adjacent to that, but piracy was not in the mix at all. And I was like, that's a huge question. I mean, we're talking about huge amounts of value getting moved across the ocean. Anyone who's interested in making a quick buck would do well to loot all of it if they can. I mean, to briefly give a frame of reference, there are entire vessels that were dedicated to nothing but sailing from Genoa to Barcelona to pick up basically nothing but honey from Catalonia and drive it clear across the Mediterranean to cut to Alexandria, Egypt. Entire ships. I actually did the math. I think the number was 60,000 liters of honey per ship. And I did the math. You could roughly fill 2/3 of all the classroom tents at Penzic University with that much honey, if you put it all into 2-liter soda bottles. Um, and honey is almost literally a form of liquid gold, actual currency, because one of the ways that you can define currency, if you're being a little glib and flippant, is currency is whatever the local government will accept for tax payments, right? Because that if everyone has to pay their taxes, then everyone wants whatever the government will take for taxes. And the Teutonic Order in modern day, Prussia and Germany and whatnot, actually accepted honey as a form of taxation. And they even paid mercenaries in their payroll with barrels of honey. So this is literally arguably a form of currency, and there are ships full of nothing but barrel and barrel and barrel, or jars would have been more common at the time, of honey. I had no answer for people who would have just wanted to steal it. So my current research project that I've been a little derelict with because I've been busy and my curiosity has just been elsewhere, but I need to get back to it to prepare the next lecture series for next Penzic, which is going to be all about medieval piracy, which has turned out a lot of really interesting stuff. I mean, the first thing that I explain to people is if you want to understand medieval piracy, you have to forget everything that you know about early modern piracy because it works in a completely different way. There was not a notion that piracy was something you were. You were not a pirate. It was purely an action. Um, And it was an action that otherwise perfectly legitimate business people would partake in. And that wasn't considered, this is before the development of international diplomatic standards. This is before the development of a sense of, widely agreed upon universal rules of the sea. Because what would happen is you'd be sailing on the sea and you'd see a ship that might have some cool cargo. You'd board it, you take it by force, and you go on your merry way and continue being a legitimate businessman. Your victim would go home and be like, listen, let's say that this is a Frenchman. He'd go home and say, listen, this Spaniard stole my stuff, and he was from Barcelona. And your city would send a letter to Barcelona saying, hey, one of your guys stole from one of our guys. Please give it back. And the city of Barcelona would have basically three options. One, they could pay out from a security deposit that I would have left as a ship captain, as a merchant leaving from Barcelona. I might have left a security deposit because it was expected that merchants would do this. You would leave a security deposit behind, basically saying, if I steal $10,000 worth of stuff, here is, $20,000 that you can pull 10,000 out of to pay out, right? To make up so that we can still be cool. If I didn't have that, they might come to me and be like, Ezra, you stole stuff, please give it back. Okay, you already sold all of it? All right, well, we're just going to take an equivalent value from you. And if neither of those options worked, then the Frenchman's city could now issue him a letter of marque, which would say, so Barcelona, someone from Barcelona stole your stuff, and Barcelona is not paying up for it, which means that basically this guy from Barcelona stole $10,000 from you, and Barcelona's not paying it back. That means Barcelona is now $10,000 richer from stealing from you. So the entire city of Barcelona is complicit. So you can steal it back from any Barcelonan that you come across legally. That's fair. That was considered fair play in the Middle Ages. So you would go and you would steal from a random Barcelonan who would go home to Barcelona and say, this random Frenchman just stole $10,000 from me. And you might get a letter of marque. And you create this unending ripple of vindication of everyone stealing from each other that eventually leads to the establishing of, okay, we need to knock this off. If you steal from someone on the high seas, we are all going to make you pay for it. Okay? There's an interesting line of reasoning within one of the articles I read that basically argues that when the Mediterranean stops being a shared polity, right? Because under the Roman Empire, the whole Mediterranean is under a single administrative, cultural, political unit. And then it's not anymore in the Middle Ages. And you can vaguely divide it between Christendom and the Dar al-Islam. But even within those units are rival powers. And the author, who I can't remember right now, I'd have to double check, basically argues that this is the foundation, the fact that it's shared, and now everyone has to figure out a code of some kind to interact, not even necessarily to play nice, but they have to have some kind of shared, understood protocol for war and trade and peace and everything. And that's the first foundations for basically modern international diplomacy. Because this is the first time that different powers, different political units have to write out the rule book for how do we interact with each other? What's going to be, the standard law when we are not all under a standard law, like under the Roman Empire? And it's that kind of interconnectivity, that kind of web of information where everything is impacting everything else. The Mediterranean was partially terraformed, basically, for beekeeping. It's not that everyone all got together and was like, hey, let's turn all the Mediterranean basin into shrubland so that we can keep bees. It's just that after the basin was deforested for other reasons, it was beneficial to keep it deforested because people were keeping bees there, and that was a very lucrative venture. So the very ecology of the Mediterranean basin is based on the fact that people really liked honey from there. you can't talk about any one thing without getting into 1,000 other things. And that's what I love about historical scholarship, because it opens so many doors. And the SCA is basically one massive hallway of doors to get lost in.
So I'm going to backtrack because there's a lot
Go
in
ahead.
there, and I got a lot of little questions. So,
Sorry, sorry, I got going.
no. That's perfect. That's exactly what we want. That was super fascinating. I'm going to try to compartmentalize. So, before you got into the SCA, because this is something we find very common. What was your like gateway? Were you into the medieval period through like books or Renaissance festivals or video, like video games, stuff like that? That's why the minute you walked into that room, you were like, these are my people, and this is my bag. Like, what were you? What was kind of like your lead in to SCA life?
Um, Tabletops and video games for the most part. Um, I got into D&D in middle school. And that kind of immediately prepped me for the mindset of, medieval-esque environments. Um, it got me into the mindset of, role play and improv, which are very important skills for, things like heraldry and bardic in the SCA. Any kind of, protocol and etiquette relies on it. And I was always interested in history. Um, I don't think I was especially interested in the medieval period specifically, except that another former partner of mine was going to university for medieval studies. His plan was to become professional academic in the field of medieval studies. And we had a lot of conversations about that. I learned a lot from him, and that kind of got the ball rolling in the medieval direction. Um, and then just, the SCA is a den of weirdos who understand other weirdos, and I've been a weirdo my entire life.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So
go ahead, Jeff. Yeah, I mean, I got more, but go ahead.
no, go ahead, Lucas, because I was going
So,
to take us back to bees, but
well,
you go.
that was my next thing. Is that then I'm in there? I'm like, so why bees? Do you have any experience keeping bees and doing that, or was this just like a rabbit hole of scholarship, and you were like, I got it. You know what I mean?
It was a rabbit hole that got kicked off because I saw somewhere someone mentioned that apparently Catalonia was a major exporter of honey back in the day. Actually, still today, it remains an exporter of honey. It remains it Catalonian honey is still regarded to be high quality honey. And being a Barcelonan persona, being a Catalonian persona, I was like, this is persona research. This is a way for me to, build out my persona more. Maybe Ezra's family, were professional beekeepers, made their money off of beekeeping, and that's how they could afford to educate him and whatnot. And then it just kind of took off from there. I found Dr. Sapochnik's research, which was basically just a whole brick of the exact information that I wanted. I got very lucky.
So my question about bees is about the pirates. So you've done all this research now into medieval pirates, pirates in the Middle Ages, the beginning of piracy as we know it, as we then morphed into what we know. But anyway, so what did you find out about the honey? Have you found out anything yet?
I haven't, and this is the vexing thing about seeing two different threads of research that you can connect somehow, is other scholars, right, have done the legwork in each of those threads, but no one is asking the same question you are.
Hmm.
And that's where I'm kind of running right now, is I've established an understanding, right? Like I've done a literature review basically. Like I understand the basics, but I haven't figured out where to go next to find those threads of, all right, so here's what's going on with medieval piracy. What questions can I ask? What sources can I look at where I can find something that talks about specifically honey or even mentions it that I could build off of? So I know a lot about where piracy is happening, why it was happening, who was doing it, how it worked, but I haven't figured out anything specifically about, those honey trade routes or focus on honey or anti-piracy activities. I haven't found anything out yet.
Yet.
Through your research, I mean, you said you got lucky with this sort of brick of information. Um, is there any adjacent information like travel logs by these various captains and things like that? Have you kind of gotten into that as well? Like, specific stories from, actual traders and merchants, or just kind of through the research of scholars?
I've done it all so far through the research of scholars, but some of the secondary sources I've been looking at have mentioned travel logs as their primary sources, and that's one of the directions that I want to start heading, is basically seeing if I can get my hands on those. And here's the crucial part. Here is the single biggest brick wall for me regarding the research I'm trying to do, which is that I don't speak or read medieval Italian or Spanish. And so if no one has gone through and done the work of translating these primary sources, they're just no good to me. I would love to read them. I'd love to gather that information, but I literally just don't understand what they're saying.
Mm.
Hmm. Oh, I get that. Try being somebody who has a Hungarian persona. Like, it's one of the hardest languages to learn.
Yeah,
I've tried. I don't grok it at all. So
yeah,
all my sources have to be secondary.
yeah.
So let's dive into some of the other stuff you do.
Hmm.
You are a performer. What do you
Yes.
do in the SCA performance wise?
I mostly do storytelling and songs. I do poetry sometimes, but the poetry tends to be more personal. Um, I don't really go out to do poems as a performance. Generally, my poetry is meant for someone or for a specific circumstance. So when I'm going out and performing, it's usually some kind of song or storytelling that I'm doing. And the storytelling I like to do um, in kind of traditional performance venues, because, everyone who's there showed up for this kind of thing. Um, Storytelling requires a certain degree of audience buy-in. Um, in order for the storytelling to be effective, the audience should be paying attention to what you're saying. Um, the singing, I mostly do kind of drive-by. I kind of have a personal rule at Penzic, which is if I'm walking down the road and I'm not feeling totally winded, then I should be singing something. Um, this most recent Penzic, Penzic 51, um, I had to do laundry at the laundromat for the first time. I was at a different camp, and this camp did not have a communal clothesline set up, and I didn't have a clothesline, so our only option was to actually go to the laundromat. So my partner and I gathered up our big, heavy duffel bag of a week's worth of dirty garb, and we made our way to the laundromat. We got in line, and we knew it was going to be like 2 hours before we were done with our business, at least. So I started singing. And that was a brilliant idea because it basically turned into, I took breaks now and again, but it basically turned into an off again, on again concert. Um, and I got to have fun with the people who were there because some people, chimed in or had songs they wanted to sing. I got to sing a lullaby to a fussy baby for several minutes. It was very rewarding. One of the lessons that I've picked up from both Dame Ursula Mortimer and Dr. Henry Best, two people I look up to, is that you should always go where the entertainment is needed, right? The example that they usually give is if you are in a dining hall, and you look around and there's a full table of people that are all chatting and laughing and having a conversation. They don't need you. They're perfectly entertained on their own. Like this is like they're clearly filling up their time, and you showing up and trying to perform is just kind of like interrupting them. If there's someone sitting by themselves or a group of people that's kind of sitting quietly and somberly, then maybe that's where you're needed. And where do people sit more quietly and somberly than the Penzic laundromat? So I was very, very happy. I was very proud to make that a more magical place for people. because I could tell, I'm reading the room, of course. I'm making sure that I'm not being an annoyance. I tried to make sure that I didn't sing the same song, again and again. Or I think I did a few repeats, but it had been like an hour since the last time I did it, so it was mostly a new crowd. But people were thankful, people were grateful, and it made what is normally a slog that no one wants to deal with into an honestly magical moment where for, in that time, in that place, there was a bard.
Mhm.
So mentioning Dame Ursula and Dr. Henry brings up a question, and I'm not gonna go into the background of this, but I know that you have decided in the SCA that you have no desire in pursuing a dependency with a peer. Can you
That
talk
is
about what that decision, where you came about that decision? Because it goes against all the way we're taught in the SCA, and I love it. I love that
Yeah.
you're doing this. So what brought this decision on?
So Dame Ursula and Dame Ursula was one of the first friends I made in the SCA. She taught a class at my first event, and we hit it off very well. We became very close after that. Um, and she was laureled at the third event that I ever went to. I literally grabbed a Greyhound to go to Louisville so that I could be at her elevation. And I knew very early on that I wanted to take a belt from her. I also knew that that was not a decision to make lightly. Um, so at my first Pennsic 49, I told her that I would like to explore the option with her. And she agreed, and we agreed to do a year and a day trial run, like many others do. And we did it. We agreed that whatever was going to happen would happen at Pennsic 50, because what could be more magical than to do literally anything at Pennsic 50? And we did it for a while, and it was very good. Um, I got a lot out of it. I learned a lot out of it, but I also made a point to think very carefully because I did not want to squander this opportunity to, not make this decision lightly. And I gradually realized that there was something that was holding me back from saying, give me the green belt, which was I felt within myself a twinge of something negative, a certain repulsion to being called Ursula's apprentice. And I explored that. I reflected on that. And I realized that there is a substantial degree to which I value my sense of autonomy, my sense of self-ownership. In my modern life, I'm lacking in those things, and I'm not going to get into that. But the SCA is where I get to be Ezra, where I really get to shape my life and my image the way that I want it to be shaped, in a way that I can't in my modern life. And I realized that being a dependent would cast a certain shadow over me, and that's just a part of a dependency. Most people understand that. Most people are okay with that, where you will always be your peers dependent, right? Unless you terminate the relationship or whatever, but there will always be that certain shadow of, did I do this because I wanted to do this, or did I do this the way that I wanted to do it? Or did I do it the way my peer wanted me to do it? Did I do it because my peer wanted me to do it? And um, and even if I never felt that way, it bothered me that other people could. And we could say, you shouldn't care about what other people think or whatever, but it matters to me that people understand me and know that anything that I do is my decision, that I'm doing it for my sake, and I'm not doing it to make so and so happy or to tick so and so off. Because I really try, I mean, I'm human, I can be petty too, but I try to let that kind of stuff be, not my way. And being Ursula's apprentice, being anyone's apprentice, being anyone's dependent would call that autonomy into question. It would constantly create the opening for someone to say, well, you just did that, or this only happened to you because you're so and so's dependent. And that didn't sit right with me. It feels really important to me that everything that I accomplish in the SCA is on my own merits. I have doubts about the stuff that I have accomplished. I'm like, well, that only happened because I was friends with so and so, or that only happened because I was friends with so and so. How much worse would this sense of doubt get if I literally had a belt around my waist suggesting that that was the case? And I'm not saying that it is the case. I want to be clear that I don't think dependency is a bad idea. I'm not, ragging on the concept. I adore the concept. I think it's beautiful. But it felt more meaningful for me to do something that said, I'm doing this my way. I'm following my compass here. I'm beating to the march of my drum. And so at Penzic 50, and Ursula and I talked about this, she helped me workshop kind of the aesthetics, the vocabulary of what I was going to do. Where at Penzic 50, instead of taking a belt, I did what I call my scholarship ritual. So I gathered people together at my camp at Penzic. I was serving as Their Majesties Louis and Sai's war bard, their bardic champion at the time. It was a great honor, and they graced me with their appearance. And I did a ritual of my own writing. I asked, any present knights to step forward and receive my vow, and I swore to not limit myself to merely intellectual pursuits, but to pursue an understanding of warcraft and chivalry and the physical studies of the knighthood. I did not get any mods to show up. The Master of Defense that I asked to show up had a higher priority because someone in their household got put on vigil, and I left kind of as witnesses. I had two warders there, including my Baron, who kind of served as witness to the vow I made for the Order of Defense to say,
We can't hear you, Ezra. I'm not sure what happened. It doesn't show you as muted, but maybe you are. No, we can't hear you at all. Okay. Ezra will be back in a
We'll be
moment.
right back.
He's reconnecting. This is fascinating.
I'm riveted right
Yeah,
now.
me too. Me too.
Just a perspective you don't normally hear,
Yeah.
and that's really something else.
how about now?
Yes.
There you go.
Turn it off and back on. Works every time.
Okay.
So gave a vow to them, called up pelicans, swore to, make use of my knowledge and my studies, called forth laurels, swore to pursue excellence in the arts and sciences, and basically declared that, my focus was on scholarship, was to study, to pursue excellence in my way, to not take on a peer, to remain free and autonomous. And one of my campmates had made me a nice red and black chain. And Ursula said a few words, presented me with a gift, and my partner set the chain about my neck to culminate it. And so that chain, which is emphatically neither a gold chain nor a silver chain, and if anyone wants to get really particular, it is not a chain, but rather a chainmail necklace. So it is not a piece of regalia. I will die on that hill. And that is my equivalent to a belt. That is my way of signaling to the world, because that was important to me, was some way of signaling to the world that I have a particular code of a particular standard that I hold myself to regarding my scholarship, regarding my behavior, And if I ever fail in that, to hold me accountable for it. That was very important to me. And I wear that chain everywhere that I go in the SCA. I keep it in a special place in my bedroom, in a nice little box. It's in a place of honor. Um, and to this day, I filter all of my decision making through the question of, does this make me a better scholar? Is this the peer like thing to do? Because one of my campmates asked me, so like, are you saying that you want to be all four peers? Like you're pursuing all four peerages? And I was like, I'm saying that the peerage isn't the point. I'm saying that there are qualities of each peerage that I aspire to. I'm not trying to become a knight, a mod, a pelican, and a laurel. I'm trying to emulate the qualities that those orders embody because they're worth emulating. And I'm holding myself to those standards, regardless of whether or not I become a peer is secondary. And that's important to me because if someone's like, hey, you got to be careful because this might hurt, your peerage path. This might hurt your chances of becoming a peer. I could say, I don't care. That's not the point for me. That's totally irrelevant. If a crown sees fit to give me a patent, then that would be wonderful, and I may or may not, feel prepared to accept that responsibility. But it's secondary. What's more important to me is the code of ethics, if you will, is the becoming a better person and serving my fellow people in that way.
Right.
So obviously the SCA is full of people with opinions.
Yes.
I mean, that's a fair statement. Nobody get mad. But how was that received? That decision and whatnot. I mean, I imagine most people, because again, most people are pretty level-headed and probably cool with it. But did you get any blowback from that? With people being like basically saying, and I hate to say it this way, but you're ruining my experience
Mm-hmm.
by doing that. Like you're not playing the game the way it should be played. And any of that backlash,
If anyone has had any such opinions, they haven't voiced them to me. I'm not going to suggest that, there are not people who feel that I'm doing it wrong or whatever. Um, I think I've honestly met more resistance to specifically the choice of regalia, to the fact that I have a chain or chainmail necklace that I have, which is why I have that whole defense set up. I've been mistaken for a squire in the past, and I've just politely explained that I'm not a squire. I don't blame them. It's a perfectly understandable mistake to make.
yeah.
But I've been met with, I won't say confusion, curiosity. For the most part, people have responded with, that sounds cool, but I have no idea what you're talking about. Because it's not, an established thing. This is not a custom like an apprenticeship is. So I've had to explain it a lot. But for the most part, that's been the worst response is just people being like, so like, how is this different? Or like, why did you do this? How does this work? But no one has had anything negative to say about the rationale or the decision that I know of. If anyone's, whispering behind my back, they're free to continue whispering.
Yeah, who cares? I mean,
Yeah.
seriously, if they don't have the courage to talk to you to your face, then
Yeah.
we're not going to care what they think. But that's my thoughts on it because I am opinionated. And I don't make any bones about it. All right, we are so like really running out of time. So let's talk about so your religion is a large part of your identity. Being Jewish is something that you understandably, and I agree, you take pride in that, and you honor your religion in the SCA. What led you to decide to bring, though, your religion into your persona? Is that just that's who you are?
So this is actually a a useful question for me because this is I've realized that um this is something that I run into a lot. Um I uh so I came into the SCA as someone, so I'll start from the beginning. I was not born Jewish. This is a common misconception I come across because I think that there is the very, I mean, the conception that people have is anyone who has a Jewish persona is Jewish.
Mhm.
Um, and in my case, that isn't properly true. I came into the SCA as an aspiring Jewish convert. It was my intention, it was my desire to convert to the Jewish faith. As years have gone by, I've wrangled with that and I've processed with that. And my relationship to conversion is different these days. I wouldn't say that my relationship to Judaism is different, but I am an outsider to the Jewish faith. Um, but it is something that I have a connection to. It's something that I was called towards. It's something that, I maintain a connection to in my life. But my having a Jewish persona in the SCA was partially to explore that, right? Was partially to be a way to explore, potentially converting, exploring Jewish identity, getting me kind of a motivation to, up my studies, so on and so forth. Um, and it remains a way for me to further Jewish education, to help other Gentiles learn more about the Jewish culture, the Jewish religion. Um, it's, I admit that I'm sitting here sweating a little bit, like I've just like caught like there's a scandal happening in the chat right now, or a scandal in the comments, like he's not actually Jewish. This is atrocious. I admit that I sweat about that a little bit, but my stance is that if we can have the understanding that we have people who are of English, French, German heritage portraying East Asian personae, people of whatever ethnicity portraying whatever personae, then I think that the same rules apply, right? Of engage respectfully, be clear about where you're coming from, be mindful of the places where you could make mistakes, and own up to when you make those mistakes. I once had a gentleman at a Penzic class. I was not my class. I was at a class, and I mentioned my name was Ezra. I had a Jewish persona, and someone asked me like, "What do you think about the idea of a Gentile having a Jewish persona?" And I was like, "Well, I kind of have to be supportive because otherwise I'd be a hypocrite because I'm not Jewish." Um, but I said, if you're going to have a Jewish persona as a non-Jew, there's a few rules like don't let anyone. If someone mistakes you for a Jew, you should correct them. And you shouldn't do things like attend Jewish religious rituals, passing yourself off as a Jew. That's a huge no-no. Don't do that. Don't engage with elements of the culture that are closed off to you as a non-member. But for me, it's a way of advancing the education. It's a way of showing solidarity. It's a way of, maintaining a relationship. Um, and it's a way of exploring something that I'm not part of, and broadening my horizons in that way.
Okay.
And to date, you still haven't made that choice fully yet. Is that what you're saying? Like in your
Yes.
personal life? Okay.
Yes.
Again, I have I similarly know where you come from because I was raised Catholic, but for 14 years of my life I went to a synagogue for childcare reasons and whatnot. And basically, at like the age of 10, I knew all the prayers. I knew everything phonetically. And finally, I had a very nice woman who said, "Do you want to know what you're saying?" And I was like, I'd love, I mean, again, 10 years, sure, I'd love to know what I'm saying. And I was sort of learning, the faith of my family and then this other thing, kind of side by side. And I became a religious studies minor, and now I teach ancient religions and mythologies
Hmm.
uh, to high school students. So like all of mine made all of that experience for me made religion very academic. Like I
Yeah.
love to look at different faiths and kind of cross reference them and really just make these really just beautiful connections between all these different faiths.
Mhm.
But I have been even in my adult life, I've been very lucky to still be invited into those ceremonies and things that people have
Mhm.
held on to in my life and whatnot. My Hebrew is really bad at this point.
Mine too.
I don't. I mean, I was good. I was pretty good at one time. But having not practiced in a very very long time. But yeah, I kind of know that because like I kind of ride that line too. And I thought for a long time that I was going to convert, and that was just a decision I was going to make. So
Mhm.
I get a little bit of what you're saying on that whole like. You don't want to feel like a pretender. You don't want to feel like you're doing it a disservice and whatnot. You want to treat it with respect. So
Yeah.
I really kind of feel that. I really appreciate that too. That's wonderful to hear. And I do agree with you. I do agree with you that if we're allowed, if the SCA is about exploring things, and learning cultures and whatnot, that you should be allowed to kind of respectfully and and with academia in mind, look into those other areas and kind of pursue them.
Mhm.
Um, you know, uh, so yeah, I agree with that. But that's super fascinating. I love this.
Mhm.
This is
Yeah.
great.
Mhm.
We're gonna have to have you back on, Ezra, because it's time for the final
Yeah.
question of the evening. So what can the SCA do better?
That's a very long list. Um, I really approached the SCA kind of with the mindset of, you know, my SCA right or wrong, if right to keep it right, if wrong to make it right. Um, I guess to pick something out of the hat, um, I think I think that the SCA it's one of those situations where it's like I have a million answers to this, but you've asked me the question now, and they've all flown out of my head. But I think that the SCA has a very storied history. I think that the SCA has come to life in its own way. We're approaching 60 years of history, and we have, legends and myths. Um, I think we've done a phenomenal job at treating that with appropriate respect. We have entire SCA historians. There are kingdoms that have historian positions and whatnot. I think the SCA has to strike, and this is very difficult, has to strike a balance between having reverence for that history because it's where we come from, it's what shaped us, while also understanding that we're shaping history today. Um, I I come from a very old barony. Cleflands is the fifth oldest barony in the Midrealm. We've been kicking since late 70s. I should know this off the top of my head, but I don't. We have a lot of history. We have a lot of players that have been around forever. We have people who were founding members that are still showing up in armor and kicking people's butts. Um, there's a lot of history in Cleflands. There's a lot of histories in the mid. There's a lot of histories in the SCA. I think that there is an important place for that. I value tradition highly. I value my baronial traditions highly, and to the point where I get defensive of them. But I think that we need to be open to the next chapters. I think that I think we need to get better at being daring and being supportive of people who are daring. I think that need to get better at not resting on our laurels, as it were. We need to get better at realizing the way the world changes, the way that things don't work the way that they used to work. I think that we need to get better at adapting to new ways of being. Um, I think this, and this might be, a relatively regional opinion or a personal opinion, because my experience with events is I rarely get to see a small event. Um, Even my local events are usually there's a lot of labor put into them. Um, I like to remind people that we started off as a backyard party, and I would pose the question, and I flatter myself thinking that this is an example of striking that balance between reverence for history and striking a new path. What's wrong with having a backyard party? And there's answers to that question, but do we need to have a massive event? Do we need how much labor has to go into this event? At what point are we putting so much into an event that it's not fun for the people involved anymore? Can we do something about that? Can we make it easier to have an event? And we can say, oh, well, then we wouldn't have this and we wouldn't have that. Well, but we might be having fun. And we talk about burnout in the SCA. Maybe that could do something about it. Um, but I think that we need to be more daring. I think that we need to be more willing to take risks. The Shire of Rivendell, around the Youngstown area, I take a lot of inspiration from them. Shout out to my friends over there. They're a small group. They do not have a lot of resources. They host a teeny tiny little event out of a church that they are not allowed to charge admission for because it's out of a church. They put on the event. They put out a huge day board. They offer up a potluck feast. I went there. I couldn't make it this year. I went last year. I walked away having had more fun in ages, having been in an incredible company, and full to bursting for free. I put a little money in the jar, but they didn't ask anything of me. And they made money on that event. They pulled a profit. And this is the kind of thing that people might be tempted to say, well, you could never pull a profit on that. They do consistently. They do it every year. And to me, that's an example of being willing to break the rules, to strike out from the established way of doing things in a way that might not work. But if you can take the hit, what's the harm? You take the hit and you learn and you try something different. So I think that we should try shaking things up more and experimenting with new ways of going about our business. That's my take on the matter.
Okay, thank you.
That's awesome. Yeah, Ezra, we're definitely going to have you back.
Yeah, there's so many more questions to ask.
Yeah.
All right, you have been watching Simply SCAdian, no title required. Thank you, Ezra, for being our guest today. We will see everybody else in 2 weeks with another special awesome guest.